So that means I've been doing this for 53 years. So I must say that my son and two of my grandchildren also are GIS professionals. So we're the only three generation family doing GIS in the world. So that's kind of fun. So I did create one of the first GIS programs, and I taught for 38 years, and then retired. And in fact, I received the Lifetime Achievement Award from Esri. But then they asked me to come back and be a consultant to them. For the last 9 years, then I've been consulting with them on issues that are important to higher education. And part of my objective with getting involved here is that I feel that Esri products are not being used to the full extent that they should throughout the world. The presentation I'm making is very much about what's happened in the United States. But I think that now that all the barriers to entry have come down, I think it's time for the rest of the world to take advantage of this. Instead of producing 3,000 story maps a day, why not 10,000 story maps a day? And I think that librarians play a key role in making that happen. And I'm going to try to convince you of that. So without further ado, this is the interface then of a story map chapter. Okay, and you can see here that I have the nice thing about the story map format is that I can jump around. I can navigate myself through various sections. So here's the presentation. I'm going to tell you something about how GIS services have changed over the last 30 years, the role now of librarians in a modern environment, talk about adoption and motivation. Why have librarians gotten involved with this? Kind of make some assessment of the current situation, look at some of the challenges that are taking place, and that's basically the presentation. So we can navigate through this. Oops. Let me go up here. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look at GIS services for the last, again, about 30 years. So back to about 1990, GIS is something that was very much a niche market. It was something that was taught in geography departments and some environmental sciences. In the United States, a group called the University Consortium for GI Science was created in 1994. We got 16 institutions around the country to represent a group of people. Some of you might refer to that. You can see the UCGIS is very active, a group of academic GIS people. They have great interest in the subject of how librarians are working directly with them. But back in 1990, it was very scary for a librarian to start thinking about doing GIS. GIS was just something that we saw multiple licenses across a campus, needed research grants to fund this thing. You had to use specialized hardware and software, very complex projects. You had to deal with how to create the data. So instead of being able to go out and find 9,000 data themes like you can with a living atlas, you basically had to create your own. We had very crude kind of imagery, very low level elevation data. These concepts of raster and vector, the different types of approaches to handling geographical data were very different. And there's two separate camps. Some people did vector stuff and other people did raster stuff. Very limited kind of 3D kind of stuff. Very limited, no networks. If you wanted to share data with somebody, you put it on a CD and walk down the hall. That's why we called it sneaker net. You copied it and ran it down the hall and gave it to somebody. So now let's look forward. Let's fast forward to where we are today. The current situation, multiple disciplinaries. I'm going to convince you that GIS is perhaps thriving more at universities that do not have a geography department than those that do. Some of the most exciting work in our country is taking place at some of our most prestigious universities, the quote Ivy League colleges, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, the best research universities in the country, Only one of those departments has a geography department. The rest of them have thriving GIS programs outside of geography. And that's across the country. We have something that's known as Carnegie. Oops, excuse me. There's a boat going by on the lake. So some of our most prestigious universities, the most prestigious research universities, every one of them has what we call an Esri site license, and a great deal of activity going on there. So almost universally, in fact, at one point I started looking, I found 190 different universities that had GIS services being offered in their library. So it's really an amazing transformation that's taking place. And it's at all levels of higher education, 2-year community colleges, 4-year undergraduate liberal arts programs. And it's becoming part of a campus infrastructure. And that's why it's beautiful that it's in the library. The libraries have stable funding and they can get involved in it, and they can provide services without having to get some jealous activity from an individual department. And GIS is something that we run today on powerful, inexpensive Windows and Apple personal computers. We have high-speed wireless. I'm talking to you via the cloud right now from a hotel room in New Hampshire, okay, to you people in spread out through Greece. So, all of those kind of barriers to using GIS have, now we even have GIS as a service, so you don't even need to locate. To run story maps, you don't need to install any software on your computer. All of it's done in the cloud. So we could argue that over the last 30 years, there's been an evolution within the academic libraries. First one was, in our country at least, a lot of the census data was available on CD-ROM. So our federal government provided us a lot of data that was available free of charge. So there was data for the whole country. And we started to have an evolution there where we moved from complex hardware and software to just standard personal computers with a very simple to use graphical user interface. Something we called ArcView became a critical item. But at the same time, map librarians found that it was a great demand to scan their existing collections, right? So you've got a set of aerial photographs and historical maps, and a lot of that got involved with scanning those and putting those out on the internet so people can browse those that way. So that was a second era that kind of woke up map librarians to the notion that they should start thinking about dealing with digital data. And now the current service is just a proliferation of what we call geospatial services, a major contributor to the modernization of library services. And it's something in which it's an opportunity, and many academic libraries in the United States have jumped on this opportunity. So it sort of becomes interesting. What is the role of a librarian today? Well, they provide scholarship services. They need to be experts in some manner of all disciplines. They work with a variety of different tools. We could argue that they provide reference services for geographical material. They're responsible for the maintenance and the collection, the distribution and the preservation of various media. But much of this is now geographic data stored in digital form, and the librarians are taking a very active role in providing the tools. We have librarians now producing their own metadata, producing their own portals so people can find the data, and I'll show you some of those things. So some of the things, when people started thinking in the early 90s about a librarian starting to deal with GIS, they figured that the learning curve was very steep and the software was not intuitive. So there were a lot of failures. It took a real commitment for somebody early in the 90s to get involved with this. But things started to change. So some kind of adoption and motivation. See, I can jump around. It's kind of neat, right? I could jump around to different parts of my talk directly. But I'm going through it linearly right now. So adoption and motivation. And there was a number of things. I put together sort of a timeline here. There were some organizations, some of the librarians began to think about this. And it's a topic that they started talking about. All the way back into 1980, you had this group called the Map and Geography Roundtable of the American Research Libraries. This thing is now called Magritte. The North American Cartographic Association got involved. But a few things also happened. Around 1990, Esri, the largest software producer, decided instead of having individual licenses, individual units, in fact, on our campus, there were 16 different units that had licenses. And I actually said to the president of the company, I said, why don't you just give us a site license? Now we can have everybody on campus can take advantage of it. So they have, and librarians then don't have to worry about the finances of it. But in fact, the other benefit of this is some of the librarians have a budget that can handle licenses. So we see lots of universities in which the library is the one that's kind of centrally pays for the site license and make sure that everybody on campus can use it. So that was a big deal. That made it available to every other one. So there were some other items here that were important. People started thinking about the whole concept of a geo library, the whole concept of a geo library, which I'll come back to in a moment. There were special issues of a journal on academic librarianship that dealt with GIS. There's some spec kits on how to transform a library. So kind of monitoring what was going on with some success stories happening here. So as we go into the 2000s, around 2004, a new journal, the Journal of Map and Geography Libraries. I know Iphigenia has published extensively in there. It became a good focal point for people to share their ideas. And so that's been very successful. Then if we jump ahead, Magritte had a symposium, GIS in every library, making it happen. It was kind of a, let's get with it, kind of trying to convince librarians that it was possible to do this. Esri in 2014 came out with its story maps, which provided a very simple way for people to get involved. So let's look down a little further here. So what changed? And I kind of have a list here. So I said the site license, the idea of stable funding, just a general kind of spatial awareness that everybody, not just geographers, but people in, and I would point to such things as, using Google Map, right? Using Google Map on your desktop, but also using Google Map on your smartphone. Okay, people are aware. People said, "Oh, I like this geographical and spatial stuff." Lots of institutional support. I've got some examples of that. Simple to use applications, in that case, ArcView. I kind of put down Moore's law here. The idea that the speed and capabilities of our processors increase every 2 years, right? Kind of a doubling of that every couple of years. So as we have huge data sets, and back when I first started doing GIS, it was just laborious. It couldn't handle the data. Now we have desktop computers that can handle massive amounts of data. We have very inexpensive storage, little flash drives and other things where it costs you practically nothing to store it and to save it, putting it out on the cloud. This idea that software as a service, don't have to install anything on your computer. All of those things are important. It's sort of saying, well, that's kind of interesting, And so what I started thinking about is that this adoption by libraries of providing GIS services is very much a diffusion of innovation, right? It's how do you accept something new, and how do you decide to make a commitment to providing this type of service? So this is a classic model that a guy named Rogers in 1995, who called this a diffusion of innovation model. And generally speaking, we start from innovators, those people who are real risk takers. And then they got early adopters, maybe about 13% of the libraries in this case. Then we get up to kind of an early majority. And then we come down the cap, how do we get everybody involved? And I would argue, at least in the United States, in academic libraries, I found at least 190 universities that have now adopted. So we've got an adoption curve that follows a standard kind of diffusion of innovation. That curve, I think, was important. And then there was a couple of very important things that took place. In 1992, the Association of Research Libraries took on a project. They called it a GIS literacy project aimed for librarians. And here's a picture of people sitting around looking at what was going on. There was a major commitment by software vendors and some universities, University of Maryland, Kansas, Connecticut, to try to introduce GIS to academic libraries. And what the objectives was to introduce GIS. The idea was, now we have standard personal computers, we have easier to use software, so why don't we try to train people into how to do this? So they got together a number of librarians and they went through a training program, and ESRI provided free software and consultation. The president of the company, Jack Dangerman, back in 1992 said he believed that this effort will foster public access and more libraries will join in the future. So this literacy project was critical, and everything doesn't go smoothly. There's some people who tried it and found it a little bit too daunting, and they couldn't deal with it, or they couldn't convince their administrators that it was worth taking a chance. But generally speaking, things have progressed, right? So around 2000, in the 2000s, we have this spec kit. And there's this general thought that GIS in the early 2000s, maybe up to 2005, they're beginning to see that we could have GIS was many different places beyond geography into law, history, chemistry, geology, education. So lots of cross-disciplinary work starting to take place. And I think this is pretty amazing here. So this, the American Library Association had this group, and they got together and they say GIS for every library, making it happen. So this is 2010, right? A real commitment, again, about 12 years ago, to get serious about this. I thought this was kind of neat. If you ever follow this literature, they have, there's a guy who produces some cartoons about things. And I thought this was fun. He kind of said that in 1990, this whole GIS stuff confused us. In 1994, it frightened us. By 1998, we were frustrated about it. And 2005, our heads were filled with information overload. I thought that was kind of clever. I thought that was also, there's an interesting guy, Jim Boxall, who's in Nova Scotia in Canada, and he was editor of the journal, and he said that librarians should jump on this. This should be the geographic moonshot. They should seize the opportunity and get going. So it's got some challenges that were taking place. At the same time, the general public was beginning to understand that web-based that you could go to your computer, enter an address, find the location, and magically you would find a route to that. This technology in the late 1990s proliferated, and again with Google Map in 2005, perhaps everybody's saying, universally now, that on your smartphone, the mapping application is probably the, one of the most important things. So again, some surveys that were done in 2015. Instead of a map library in 1990, where you've got a bunch of paper maps, you've got some aerial photos sitting in drawers, very few people ever coming in. Now we have bustling geospatial centers. The libraries have just evolved into geospatial centers and generally considered the go-to location. You know, if you're going to create and expand GIS use on campus, then the library is the place to provide investments and making decisions about it. So let's talk about the last group of people. And it's kind of interesting. These two people, Gallagher and Gamble, at a small college in Florida, they said, why aren't we using story maps? And they say that story maps, they jump on it. Story map connects with an audience, right? It creates an interest in a topic. My simple little one on the cities and places I visited in Greece are just a sample of the, as I say, millions now that exist. It's a good matter for a simple and powerful format. The successful GIS support programs can be easily implemented with low risk. So you talk about those laggards at the end of the adoption curve, and they say, well, why not, right? This is really simple. I can get success. You know, I showed you my little thing in a matter of minutes. Somebody could go into a library, go to the Living Atlas, add some of their own data, and walk out with something that's posted on the internet and share it with everybody, all within just a few minutes. So you get real success stories there. We're pretty excited about that. So as I say here, about 1.8 million story maps, and now it's over 9,000 individual things. So what I've provided in my story map is links, right? So here's a link. Come on, you can do, there we go. Okay, so I've got links embedded within my story map. So here's a topic on ArcGIS story map. So if you want to dig deeper into that, you know, you can use the story map as a way of navigating, right? And the Living Atlas, again, don't have to install any software. ArcGIS Living Atlas of the world is the foremost collection of geographical information from around the globe. Maps, apps, data layers, all readily available. So that's a huge change. So now we look at the current situation let's look at what the story is in the United States. As I say, I went to every one. I took the whole list of all of the Esri people have site licenses, went out to their website, looked in their library. Okay, and I found over 190 universities where there was a direct link to GIS services from their library. So I thought that was pretty remarkable, you know, almost universally, right? So here's a whole bunch of those things. Here's another couple of things. So let's look at librarians now. This woman here, Julie Sweetkind Singer, she's the assistant director at the Banner Earth Sciences Map Library. She's a map librarian at Stanford University. Okay. Well, she recently was the chair of the most important geospatial advisory committee in our federal government. So I was the second chairman. She was the fourth chairman of the most prestigious thing. Every Ivy League university now has GIS services. The GIS services at the library at Yale University, okay, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. No geography department. They held a GIS day in 2019. It went on for 3 days. Okay, they have a group that's called the Story Map Club. Faculty and students who come to the library on a regular basis. And the woman who runs that, Miriam Olivari, is a very well-known person. She's the GIS librarian at Yale, and she's been named one of the 30 GIS and women by most important 30 women in the field. Princeton University, another one of our most prestigious universities. They have 19 different short courses, okay, and training sessions. So people come to the library. Again, Princeton does not have a geography department. These librarians, here's a librarian now producing tutorials. One of these is at Penn State University, the other is at Carnegie Mellon. So the librarians are taking an active role in creating their own content. At Clemson University, which is in my state, I found it amazing. 130 physics students were creating story maps. It all dealt with global issues, right? But they sat down, and we could also, this is like flipping the classroom, right? It's flipping the classroom where the students use the time in class to work together on their projects. They read things on the outside and they post their final project on the internet. So just amazing, right? So there's all kinds of new titles. There's lots of, I went out and said, how many job opportunities are there for GIS librarians? And I found 48, okay? With interest, just an hour of browsing. And you get people who are called geospatial data GIS map librarians, director of GIS statistical services, a developer of digital spatial research, and senior programmers. So what's happened is a major change. Let's look at mission statements. Here are two libraries, one at Penn State University, the other at Arizona State. So at Penn State, what is the mission of the library? To support interdisciplinary GIS education, data discovery and literacy, outreach for the spatial data and methods to a broad range of users through workshops, consultations, online materials, collect and curate spatial data and maps, focus on education, outreach, partnerships, collection, preservation, access, and geospatial data creation. That's a mouthful, but they're centrally focused. And at Penn State, which has a very strong geography department, the library provides all of these services to the rest of the community. And they partner, they co-teach with the geography. At Arizona State, there's something called the Map and Geospatial Hub. It's a library-based center for geographic information systems and remote sensing, cartography, just a wonderful example of people. So let's browse ahead here. Now, some of the nice work that Iphigenia has done is look at specifically the GIS service functions, okay? You know, what should a library do for its clients, right? It should introduce geospatial concepts. That's a huge issue. The librarian actually teaching some spatial concepts. That's a bit daunting still for many things. Introduce case studies and promote spatial thinking and literacy. Provide on-demand assistance. Design instructional sections. Provide consultation. Provide standalone instructional services, written instructions. Really a whole number of things that she and her colleagues have identified here. So this is sort of a checklist, you know. If you want to get involved, you know, you can have early success stories. Okay? So as I say, there's a number of checklists. Now, all of these things you could come back to. I thought this was somewhat useful. Again, one of our most prestigious universities, the University of California, Berkeley, they've been doing GIS stuff in their library for a long time, but they went through an organizational structure. So what I'm suggesting here is that when you get serious about enhancing your GIS support, get colleagues together, okay, and sit down and start thinking about how you're going to provide services, how you're going to cooperate, how you're going to fund things. So I've just provided this for an opportunity. But here, for example, so again, if I want to go to the Berkeley Library, all I got to do is access it through my story map. Right? So here's the Berkeley Library and different things. Now, Stanford, again, their library works closely with academic departments. They don't have a geography department, but they look carefully. They flipped the classroom. They dealt with an issue of water rights, some issues, severe issues that California is having. And in fact, they created a story map that became part of the governor's homepage. Right, so it's a huge issue for them. Here's it again. This is the Stanford Geospatial Center. Right, so from this one story map that I've shared with you, you could spend a lifetime looking through all of the different individual instances, right? So a lot of co-teaching going on, where you might have somebody, there's a great example at the University of Michigan. A woman was teaching cultural things about Middle Eastern culture, and she teamed up with somebody in the GIS support group in the library, and the person came into her class, right? Help students create story maps. But the other thing is that not just they created the story maps, then they wanted to do more interesting things, right? Deeper kind of things. So here's at Clemson, out of the library, you can get a GIS certificate. I think that's pretty cool. Carnegie Mellon, and one of our most prestigious research universities, they have a whole grant dealing with the role of libraries in geography and GIS education. So they're the center point at a major research university is calling people to come to the library for these kind of services. Again, these are all kind of hot links we could have. Stages of GIS support. Could generally argue that there's the first level, kind of an introductory level, where you provide links to people. All you got to do is say, here you can go to some tutorials that ESRI has out there. You can explore the Living Atlas. The second level is where you actually start providing some consultation to people. Come in, they want to get their own, they want to add their own content to other things. So I think I've been thinking about this as a maturity model, and different universities are at different stages of maturity, and sort of going from exploration to exploitation to enterprise-wide implementation. So here's an example. This is just a research guide, right? So you go to this particular site, right? This is the Newman Library at the Baruch College. This is all that's provided there. You know, there's not, but it provides you enough links. If there's a student or a faculty member who wants to get involved, then this is an entree to that. Got that? So that's sort of an entry level. An intermediate level, another university in Atlanta, Emory University, again, a very prestigious university, no geography department, but they have a center there, right? So there they provide links to different resources. At the same time, they provide hands-on consultation. That's pretty cool, I think. We have some universities that have been at this for a very long time now. Some of these were really early innovators. And perhaps the best example of this in our country, and perhaps anywhere in the world, would be the University of Minnesota. And they have something that's called U-Spatial. Okay, U-Spatial is offering geospatial skills throughout the entire campus. Okay, so you go to the U-Spatial, you'll see, I think there are 55 different departments, academic departments, that are providing GIS applications, right? So that's remarkable. And it's kind of cute. They just did this about 2 weeks ago. You can now get a geospatial skill badge. Kind of a funny thing to do, but let's see if it brings it up. Yeah. So here you can get a badge, geospatial badge in storytelling. That's pretty cool, I think. And again, one of the most prestigious universities and one that's been at it a long time. Now, let's talk about a little bit, I'm almost to the end of this concept of a Geo Library. Back as early as 1994, the National Research Council in our country funded a major project at the University of California in Santa Barbara to deal with something that was a Geo Library, or a library containing geo-referenced objects with a search mechanism based on geographic location as the primary search. Okay, and so it was interesting. So you could search for content based on visually interacting with an on-screen map, formally by specifying the location of something with a coordinate system, or informally by some kind of place name. So this was a major topic in the early to mid 90s. Now we got some new concepts where the librarians have taken the lead, and I'll call this spatial discovery. And it's the same concept. It is a Geo Library, and much of the effort behind this is taking place at Stanford University. But they've enlisted lots of other people, and there's an open source software called Geo Blacklight. It's open source. You can go to GitHub and do it yourself. So librarians are beginning to build their own portals. And I think it's kind of interesting because you start thinking about geographical content. And one of the guys that works at Stanford, he said it's like the book on a shelf, right? So librarians are familiar, basically things are organized in the library by content. So you go to a particular bookshelf and you say there's a book on ecology. Next to it is another book that you didn't know about, right? So you've discovered something by actually going through that experience. Well, let's move that to a digital map base, right? Where you probe and you say, okay, I am interested in portraits. But you go and you probe in there and you find, wait a minute, look at all these other people who have actually dealt with this topic. Oh, this whole concept here, at the Stanford example, 19 different universities have formed a consortium. In our universities, there's a lot of something called the Big Ten, all the major land grant universities in the Midwest, things at Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Penn State, they have all formed together and they form one big portal. Okay, so you can go out here for this is the Stanford example. Discover and download GIS data and maps. Right, it's right there. It's a portal, right? And you can go discover. You don't need to load any software. You don't need to have any complicated permissions. You can just go and download it, and then you could bring it into a story map format for your own content. So it's a wonderful way to explore things. And this is done by librarians, right? So I'm going to emphasize, right? So you can search any place in the world and any subject matter you want. Wonderful kind of thing. It also shows how librarians have matured over those last 30 years. So here's all of these universities. They form a consortium, right? The Big Ten thing. So we're getting toward the end of this. I hope I've convinced you that you can play a major role in spreading GIS activities across your campus, and people are going to appreciate that you do it, because you're going to start expanding well beyond the traditional base of just geography departments or ecology departments. History, political science, it goes on and on. Just explore some of those story maps and just find wonderful examples. But it's sort of interesting. We go back to this about the impact, right? What is the impact that you have on your librarians? And you'll see that you basically straddle the line between user services and special collections. You've got the special collection that you take care of. At the same time, you've got to provide user services, right? So we might argue here that staffing, services, technology, data provision, these are all ongoing challenges, right? Data quality is a big issue. Your patrons are not going to be happy if you come in and you've got access to lousy data, or they get bad. Standards are important. Literacy is important. So another big thing is that in our environment, and I'm sure it's true throughout the world, very high resolution data sets, extraordinarily high things, and being able to process those things, helping people keep that. Librarians also playing a key role in archiving. Right? So somebody does a research project and that data is recorded. The funding group, like the National Science Foundation, requires that data be archived, that it's there permanently. And librarians have stepped forward in providing that. So big data is a huge challenge. Okay, and I'm going to wrap this up by now. I've informed you that I am a consultant to Esri. Esri is the worldwide leader. Most of you have Esri not site licenses, but individual licenses for individual departments. I'm trying to communicate with the Esri leadership that what we have done in the United States should be replicated around the world. I think we should have site licensing that's similar to what we have, so that there's no one fights over which licenses, or no fighting over what the fees are. So I'm working closely with the Esri higher education people in Europe. A guy named Michael Gould, who is an old friend of mine, but he sort of runs higher education in Europe. But we're happy. You know, we view that librarians provide a new line of service, that they become a popular, neutral location for GIS training and support. And that way, GIS gets spread across campus. So I'm working with Esri, right? I take surveys and find out what people would like, and I let them know. For example, they would like better metadata support. Librarians would like multiple users to edit a map at a time. They want to make it collaboration a little bit easier. They want to provide linkages between that Geo Blacklight application and their own stuff. So we started to identify some libraries at the most recent ESRI users conference. The president acknowledged University of Michigan, its library, and Carnegie Mellon for its special achievements. So again, what I'm trying to convey to you is that I think it's a wonderful opportunity to step forward. I think you can have success with very little risk, and people will have fun doing it. So that's my story, and you can see that using a story map to make a presentation was kind of fun. That's it for me.
Thank you, David. It was very interesting, all that you said. In an hour, you covered all the history of GIS in academic libraries. Too many things that we didn't know, most of our participants, I suppose. And too many things that you clicked for thinking. And can you please say some more words? I am sure that my colleagues, my Greek colleagues, will be interested in to know about the cooperation schema you mentioned. How do they work?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
You mentioned for cooperation of great American universities.
Yes.
Will you say some more words about it? You had the link, I think. Ohio portal, I don't remember the exact name.
Well, the Big Ten university.
Yes, the Big Ten, yes.
The Big Ten. The Big Ten are the major, one thing you said, they're the agricultural schools, okay? But they're the biggest universities. These are University of Minnesota has 50,000 students. Minnesota, Northwestern, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio State, Purdue, major universities. And they're all collaborating now with this tool, this Geo Blacklight, this whole concept. All you have to do is create the metadata. You don't have to move the data. You just provide a link to the data. So the data in GIS format is found at many, it just stays where it is with a central portal that provides the link, and then you can preview it and then download it, right? Download it in GIS compatible formats. So it's been an amazing transformation just in the last 5 years. And librarians stepping up, they just said, smart librarians and said, wait a minute, we can go to GitHub, right? Go to GitHub and put this. Stanford runs a workshop on it. Invite you to come and learn how to do it at Stanford, which is a beautiful place to visit. But they have all kinds of online tutorials about how to do this as well. So, you know, there's a lot of sharing going on.
Yes, this is very important. And the most important of all is that the concept that this kind of services can be provided by libraries that do not sustain departments that are familiar with GIS.
Right.
You mentioned that a lot of our universities use GIS, universities, libraries, academic libraries, use GIS services, but they do not sustain departments, relative departments, geography, what else? For the environment, architectonic departments.
Yeah, some of the most interesting stuff is history and culture.
Yes.
You know, different types of human geography, but also history department, sociology. If you go and you look at follow the link to the story maps, right? Again, there's a 1.5 million, 1.8 million of these things, and you'll just find really interesting stories. Okay, you know, and that story could come from a historian, from an English professor. It doesn't matter, but the librarian is the person who makes the connection for them. Right? That's yes. I think terrific.
This is the central idea that which we have to focus on it, that libraries are the main providers of such services.
Yes.
Is there any question?
That's why I'm happy to you know that you all have this presentation now, right? So you can go probe around. It can be the starting point for a little more research.
Yes.
Or hopefully it's got information that can convince like your administrator that investing in the library to do this is worthwhile. There are real benefits from this.
Things here in Greek academic environment a little bit different because we have not efficiently developed the use of geographic information in our libraries and in our services. And this is what the group wants to support and goes forward for. And I don't want to speak only me. Is there anyone who wants to set a question to Professor Cowen? Κάποια ερώτηση για τον ομιλητή? Κάτι που θέλετε να διευκρινίσει, να συζητήσουμε? Και στα ελληνικά δεν υπάρχει πρόβλημα σχετικά με αυτό. Για να πάρουμε κι εμείς και λίγη ανατροφοδότηση σχετικά με το πώς είδατε όλο το θέμα. Θα ήταν πολύ χρήσιμο. Κάποιους από τους συναδέλφους της ομάδας να πούν κάτι.
I'd be happy if somebody wants to
Yes.
send me email about a question or something, that's fine, you know, and
Yes,
again, I think the presentation is a starting point for you. I also have a series of references here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes,
so
there are a lot of references that would be very useful. And for you will excuse me to speak in Greek for a moment to say something to my colleagues. Κάνοντας έτσι προσπαθώντας να κλείσουμε την σημερινή παρουσίαση, ο καθηγητής μας είπε τι έγινε τα τελευταία 30 χρόνια σχετικά με την εισαγωγή των υπηρεσιών GIS στις βιβλιοθήκες των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών. Συγκρίνοντας την κατάσταση στην Αμερική με την δική μας την κατάσταση, παρατηρούμε ότι είμαστε ακόμα στα 30 χρόνια πίσω, θα μπορούσα να πω, προσωπική μου άποψη, διότι παρότι πολλές ακαδημαϊκές βιβλιοθήκες και όχι μόνο ακαδημαϊκές και άλλου είδους βιβλιοθήκες διαχειρίζονται τη γεωγραφική πληροφορία, εν τούτης ακόμα δεν έχουμε καταφέρει να φτάσουμε σε ένα επίπεδο που να θεωρούνται οι υπηρεσίες οι γεωγραφικές και οι γεωχωρικές συμβατές με τις καθημερινές μας δραστηριότητες. Και αυτό προσπαθεί η ομάδα των γεωγραφικών βιβλιοθηκών να καταφέρει και να αναπτύξει τις συλλογές που ήδη διαθέτει και να δημιουργήσει νέες υπηρεσίες για τους χρήστες, διότι δυστυχώς μέσα από έρευνες αναδεικνύεται η ανάγκη, ευτυχώς αναδεικνύεται η ανάγκη της, γιατί δυστυχώς οι χρήστες θεωρούν ότι οι βιβλιοθήκες δεν είναι ο χώρος που οι Έλληνες χρήστες, ότι οι βιβλιοθήκες που έχουμε, ενώ είναι πάρα πολύ καλές, δίνουν μεγάλη βαθμολογία στο πώς διαχειρίζεται το προσωπικό, την πληροφορία, εν τούτης, δυστυχώς δεν είναι ο χώρος όπου στρέφονται για τη χρήση της γεωγραφικής πληροφορίας. I was saying, Dr. Cowen, that in Greece, MAPA GIS librarianship is in its infancy. And researchers do not consider libraries as the main, how can I say, they consider that there is an insufficient place to cover their geographical needs. And despite the fact that several departments of Greek academic universities are involved in the use of GIS researches. Another point is that Greek librarians need to be skilled, need to be trained in the use of geographic information in the GIS systems, so to be able to help their users as well. And what you mentioned earlier regarding SRI is a great opportunity, and maybe each one of us who is working in an academic library that sustains at first a department which has licenses in ArcGIS can try to convince the administration for the use of it in the library as a library service.
Yeah.
So we can start using such systems in our everyday work.
Yeah, I just suggest you start with story maps. You know,
Yes.
Quick successes, people are excited about it.
It has a very wide range of uses.
Yep.
Κάποια ερώτηση, κάτι να διευκρινίσουμε σε αυτά που ακούστηκαν? αν θέλει κάποιος να τοποθετηθεί όσον αφορά το δικό το ίδρυμα, την δική του την εργασία, πώς βλέπει το στόρημα έτσι, στην καθημερινότητά του ή γενικότερα τα GIS, θα είναι χρήσιμο και σε εμάς για τις μετέπειτα δραστηριότητές μας, της ομάδας.
Well, if there are no questions,
Yes.
I would like to go have lunch.
Yes, I suppose you will. Τότε θα πρέπει σιγά σιγά να κλείσουμε, εφόσον δεν υπάρχουν κάποιες ερωτήσεις. Κύριε Τσάκωνα.
Ναι, Ιφηγένεια. Νομίζω μπορούμε να κλείσουμε. Έτσι κι αλλιώς για κάποιους, επειδή βλέπω και ονόματα από τους παριστάμενους, ήταν μεγάλη μέρα, γιατί ξέρω ότι και οι περισσότεροι συνέχιζαν και εργάζονταν. Έτσι δεν είναι ότι είχαν άνεση χρόνου. Είναι μεγάλη μέρα λοιπόν για όλους. Καλά θα ήταν να το κλείσουμε τώρα εδώ αυτό το workshop. Να ευχαριστήσουμε πάρα πολύ τον καθηγητή Cowen. Εγώ που δεν είμαι μέλος αυτής της ομάδας και αντικειμενικά η δικιά μας η βιβλιοθήκη δεν έχει τέτοιου είδους υπηρεσίες, δεν έχει τέτοιου είδους συλλογές, δεν έχει τέτοιου είδους στόχευση. Η κοινότητά μας δεν έχει αυτές τις πληροφοριακές ανάγκες. Εγώ λοιπόν την βρήκα πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα, όντως πάρα πολύ περιεκτική. Μέσα σε μία ώρα ήταν πυκνή, ήταν εύστοχη, ήταν πολύ διαφωτιστική. Και να μιλήσω λίγο στα αγγλικά, I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor Cowen for being so concise and being so informative about the GIS services in libraries. And as Iphigenia said, definitely those kind of services are at its infancy here in Greece, but we can build on this. In this conference, we have a session about the special libraries and the special collections and the special management that we need to do on several collections. So I think that many young professionals and experienced professionals will be intrigued by all these issues, and hopefully they will introduce this kind of thinking, this kind of approach in our libraries. So getting your experience, getting your insights on these matters, it's very important for our community. And we would like to thank you very much for being part of the conference. I would also like to thank Iphigenia and the rest of the group of GIS libraries here in Greece. Εμείς θα ανανεώσουμε το ραντεβού μας. Όποιος έχει εγγραφεί την Κυριακή το πρωί έχουμε ακόμα ένα workshop. Αυτή τη φορά για το Open Air και υπηρεσίες ανοιχτής επιστήμης. Καθώς επίσης και τη Δευτέρα ξεκινάει επισήμως το συνέδριο με ένα αρκετά πλούσιο πρόγραμμα. Να σας καλησπερίσουμε, να σας καληνυχτήσουμε. Thank you very much. Have a nice lunch.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Σας ευχαριστούμε όλους. Να είσαστε καλά. Καλή ξεκούραση.